conversation, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to the first of our Springboard events for this week. Springboard is a new approach to bringing you information about new titles, which we've developed with the team at Bookseller magazine. And it's designed as a week of inspiring and well-informed conversation at around the time that London Book Fair would have happened if we'd all been living in normal life. And it's about the great forthcoming titles for this season. I think we're all definitely in a bit of a more buoyant frame of mind at the moment after the announcement of the roadmap and the possible easing of restrictions and the prospect of light at the end of this incredibly long tunnel that we've all been travelling through. And I, for one, and I'm sure you all are, extremely joyful at the thought that bookshops are going to open again in the middle of April. And booksellers are getting ready to reopen. They're looking at new titles and very often they're spring cleaning their shops. So Springboard's intended to help you with that process. And every day this week, we'll be joined by one of the booksellers' previewers and an independent bookseller who will be together discussing and recommending a number of titles across fiction, children's non-fiction and paperback, so that you can make decisions about what you might stock when you open. On Friday, we'll have a special Springboard session where authors will be celebrating bookshops, so be sure to come in for the Friday session. The titles discussed during the week will be collated and circulated to booksellers afterwards, and there'll also be a special Springboard supplement in the Bookseller magazine on Friday, so be sure to look out for that, because that's going to be a really valuable resource. Today, we're joined by Will Smith from Sam Reid Bookseller in Grasmere, and the bookseller's fiction previewer, Alice O'Keefe, who will be talking about fiction titles. Before I hand over to them to introduce themselves, I'd just like to say a housekeeping point, particularly to BA members who are used to our own Zoom calls. This is obviously being run in webinar function, so you can't see each other, you can only see the speakers. If you have got questions, comments and chat, just use the chat function. And if there are any questions, we'll attempt to triage those, but don't feel any obligation if you want to just chat to each other, that's fine. And I'll come back at the end to thank the speakers and say goodbye. But for the moment, I'm going to hand you over to Will and to Alice.
Thanks, Meryl. Hi to people who do or don't know me. I'm Will Smith. I'm a bookseller at Sam Reid Bookseller in Grasmere, where I've worked for 8 or 9 years now. And I'm delighted to be here today to talk about new spring fiction. There are so many good titles coming out. So yeah, really looking forward to this.
Hi everyone, my name's Alice O'Keefe. I'm the books editor at the Bookseller, and I also write the monthly fiction preview, as Meryl mentioned. And I'm really pleased to be here today. I've selected 10 titles that are coming out in spring, which I've really loved. And I'd highly recommend that you take a look at and possibly stock in your shops if you haven't made the decision to already. So shall I start, Will? Should I just leap straight in? So this is the first.
Sorry, we were going to do it chronologically, weren't we? So yeah.
Yes, sorry. Well, by month actually. So publication date. So I'll start with. I'm actually cheating slightly because this is a February book, but I go February through to June. So this is the book I'm going to start with. As I said, it's already published, but I just can't resist telling everyone how brilliant this book is. It's like Perpetual from Francis Spufford. And I expect you'll all be familiar with him anyway. His debut novel, Golden Hill, won just about every prize possible for a debut, including the Costa First novel and the Desmond Elliott Prize. And this is just stunning. It has an extraordinary opening chapter. It's 1944, Saturday lunchtime. And a German bomb lands on Woolworths in Bexford High Street, which is a fictional part of southeast London. And everyone inside is killed instantly, including 5 little children who are there with their mums, Joe, Valerie, Alec, Ben and Vern. And what the rest of the novel does is reimagines the future of these working class children if they hadn't died in that terrible tragedy at the beginning. And the thing that really struck me about this novel is the structure. So what Francis Spufford does is the novel revisits these same 5 characters every 15 years. So 1949, 1965, 1979, 1994 and 2009. And you get a day in the life of each person. So 5 days of their life in total. And what this enables Spufford to do is to show us how much lives change and circumstances change, and because all his characters were born in the 1940s, society went through such incredible changes, and they all sort of shoot off in these different directions with different careers, their ambitions, their failures, their jobs, love affairs. And it's just extraordinary. It's also a love letter to London and how the city went through those changes. He's a technically brilliant writer. I mean, on a sentence level, it's just sheer genius. But this is also very intimate and absorbing. And, you know, I finished it just really, really moved and sorry to say goodbye to those characters, which is always a big sign for me. So yeah, like Perpetual, I really love that one.
That sounds great. I've started reading it, and the language, as you say, is just sparkling.
He's amazing. He's one of my favorites, and I interviewed him as well, and he was such a lovely man. And it was one of those interviews where you feel a bit cleverer having spoken to a very clever person. So yeah, I love his writing. Now this, oh, look how beautiful that proof is. Most of the proofs I get sent, because my lead time is so long, I get sent proofs usually the very first run, and they can be very kind of plain and dull. But this, oh, I just love those colours. And this is one of my favourites as well. This is Gyasi, Transcendent Kingdom. And you'll know her name because her debut novel, Homegoing, was an absolute sensation. This is my book of the month actually for March, and Homegoing was my book of the month in the relevant year. And yeah, Homegoing was about slavery and colonialism, and it began in 18th century Ghana with these two sisters, and one of them became the wife of a slave trader and the other one was sold into slavery, and that novel sort of traced their descendants through 8 generations, so just under 300 years I think, and it was sort of really epic in its sweep. This is a much, much tighter scope. It's the story of a single family, and it's narrated by Gifty. And at the beginning of the novel, she's doing very well. She's doing her PhD, reading for her PhD at Stanford University, and she's very interested in neuroscience, devoted to her work. And she gets a phone call from Alabama, where she was raised, and it's her mother's pastor telling her that her mother is in this grip of this terrible clinical depression. And he manages to get the mother on the plane, and then Gifty collects from the airport. And then the novel sort of Gifty tells us the story of her family and how her mother left Ghana with a baby that was Gifty's older brother in search of a better life. But we learn that this family of 4 is now 2. So something happened to her father and her brother. And so it's a book that sort of traces the reality of life in the American South for these immigrants who've come, you know, in search of a better world. And it touches on financial struggles and sort of addiction and devastating loss. But it's also a story of Gifty's triumph and her, you know, how she worked so hard and where she is now. And I loved, actually, I'm just going to quote from the publishers, said it was about the myriad ways we try to rebuild our lives from the rubble of our collective pasts. And I thought that's a really great way of summing it up. Again, it's such an absorbing read. I really can't recommend this highly enough. It's brilliant.
That just sounds great as well. Homegoing was so big for us, so I'm sure there'll be lots of people waiting for this book. Yeah, I love that actually. When you've really loved a debut, and then you get the author's second novel, and it's really exciting to kind of see what they've done. So I'd say with both of those authors, yeah, I really enjoyed the debut, so I was kind of, you know, looking out for the second one. Now, slight change of direction, crime and thriller. This is Peter Swanson. I'm always mortally afraid when I'm talking about crime and thriller books that I'm going to reveal the twist. So I'll tell you a bit about the opening, and then I'll stop talking. But what I would say is, do not pick this book up if you have anything else to do, because it is the definition of an addictive thriller. And once you start, it's really, really hard to stop. So it begins in New York with our protagonist Abigail, who just sort of spots, she's on her way to work, and she spots out the corner of her eye a guy in a coffee shop,
and she just has this massive panic. And it transpires that this man was the guy that she met a few weeks earlier on her bachelorette party, and she slept with him on this weekend. But they kind of gave each other false names and things, and she starts to think, oh my goodness, what if he's like followed me to New York and he's stalking me? And then she gets an email from an unknown email address, and it's this guy, his name is Scotty, and she's completely panicked, but then she just replies to the email and she says, look, you know, it just happened, I'm getting married, you know, I don't see you as part of my life, you know, tries to kind of shut him down. And then we learn that she's about to marry this Bruce, who's a former Silicon Valley millionaire, and they've had this whirlwind romance, and marrying him means she'll never have to work again, it'll all be wonderful. So she marries Bruce and it's wonderful, and then he takes her on this honeymoon to this exclusive island resort, which is sort of off the coast of Maine. They have to fly to the island. And it's very luxurious, sort of eco retreat. There's no phones, no TV, no computers. And the only thing she thinks is a bit odd is that there seem to be loads of men and just like one or two women. And then after a romantic dinner on the first night, who should appear but Scotty, the bachelorette guy who's obviously followed her to the island. And so she's trapped on this island with these two blokes, and that's just the beginning. And honestly, this twists and turns and flips, and you know, it's just so gripping. And also the only thing I'll add to that is it's got towards the end, it's got the single best chase scene I've read in so long. Honestly, it was like, I felt like I was in an IMAX cinema, like I was really there on this chase. So I think he's a wonderful writer. This is actually his, I think this is his 7th, and he's got quite a substantial backlist. The one that really got me into him is The Kind Worth Killing. So once you've read this one, go and find The Kind Worth Killing, because that's just, really good, top notch.
It's really interesting how, particularly with thriller writers, they start to come to prominence and they become established names like that. It's certainly a name that I knew of, but I'm really intrigued to hear the plot of this one too.
Oh, it's really good. I mean, I do enjoy crime. I'm like, you know, some people just read nothing but crime and they're total experts. But he really stands out for me as a crime writer. I'll always kind of like, oh, you know, there's a new Peter Swanson. It's always really exciting. So this one, and I know, Will, that you are a big fan of this.
I'm such a big fan. I love John McGregor. I mean, I am still slightly in pain that he is a Norwich City supporter and I'm an Ipswich fan. So I should be mortal enemies with him, but he is my favourite writer out there.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we agree on that. So he is an extraordinary writer, and his last novel did great things. I expect everyone sold lots of copies of Reservoir 13. It won the Costa Novel of the Year, and it also won Fiction Book of the Year at the British Book Awards. He's been longlisted for the Booker 3 times, and he really is something very special. Now this is Lean, Fall, Stand, and the novel is basically told in these 3 parts. And the first, Lean, has got the most electric opening. So you start reading and you're plunged immediately into the throes of an Antarctic storm. And the narrative is sort of split, and it's jumping around between, you realise, 3 men who are all part of an expedition. So as you're reading, you kind of have to piece together what's going on. But you soon realise it's really serious, that they've lost radio contact and they can't find each other. And there are 2 younger guys, Thomas and Luke, and this older man, this sort of veteran who's supposed to be in charge, called Robert. And, you know, things have just gone really wrong. And then part 2, Fall, basically explores the consequences of what has happened in Antarctica. And it begins with Anna, Robert's wife, who's back in the UK, getting a phone call in the middle of the night saying that she's got to get on a plane to Chile, where Robert has been airlifted from Antarctica and he's in hospital. And it transpires that he's had a stroke and he can't communicate. So he can't explain what happened in Antarctica, so nobody is able to sort of really find out what happened. And then the narrative continues. It moves back to England, and Anne is kind of thrust into the role as Robert's carer, which is not something, she's a professional woman, it's not something she ever kind of envisaged doing. And Robert sort of undergoes speech therapy to try and sort of be put back together, essentially. And so what is really extraordinary about this book is that John McGregor is obviously using the medium of words because it's a novel, but to explore how it would feel to lose language and to be without words, to fail to find them and to sort of slowly, painfully recover them. And I mean, how hard would that be, would you think, to write a novel about the loss of language? And he just does it because he's a genius. I'm just going to read you a teeny tiny, I'm only going to quote from this book, teeny tiny bit. And this is Robert. He always had to reach for the words as though they'd been put on a high shelf out in the stores, out of reach or left outside, snowed under, needing to be dug out. He used his hands to fill in the gaps when he couldn't quite get to the words. So it's all about his sort of recovery and recovering language. But yeah, it's really good.
And it's a big shift of pace, even for McGregor fans. They'll know him for writing about kind of Midland scenes or cities, and always in quite quirky, experimental ways, but really pushing the boundaries this time.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, you were a big fan of Reservoir 13, weren't you?
Yeah, Reservoir 13 and Reservoir Tales, that kind of duology.
Oh, yes.
Stories marry onto the novel. But even going back to, I mean, a regular bestseller for us is If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things.
Sure, yeah.
Just because it did one street in a city, and it did kind of in and out and seasonality and student street. So it had so much kind of poetics of term time and unseen time being felt through characters. Is very good at that, getting into characters' heads and making you understand their feelings in really subtle ways. So yeah, I'm loving this so far too. I'm really
Oh, great. Oh, it's good to know that that his backlist kind of has a long life, because I think he's quite a timeless writer in that way, isn't he? You can kind of imagine people reading and his stuff, you know, in years to come. Yeah, he's wonderful. Right, how are we doing for time? So this is my next choice. This is Jessie Greengrass, The High House. Now, this is her third book, but it's actually the first book of hers I've read, which I will rectify, I have to say. So her first was a collection of short stories, and then her debut novel, Sight, was shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And then she was originally published by John Murray, but then her editor, Mark Richards, left John Murray and founded his own publishing company, Swift Press. So this is a big book for Swift Press. And I really, really love this book. This book has just sort of stayed with me, really kind of deeply embedded, I think, in my psyche, and I think I will go back to it. There's a lovely just sort of quote from the book on the cover, which really sums up the book. So I'll just read this out. Crisis slid from distant threat to imminent probability, and we tuned it out like static. And the crisis referred to there is the environmental crisis that we're sort of heading towards, which makes it sound like a very bleak book, and it's just beautiful. So The High House was once a holiday home that was owned by this scientist called Francesca, who was one of the few people to really grasp the severity of what was happening. So she prepared this house, which is by the coast. It had like a vegetable garden and an orchard and a tide pool and a mill, and she sort of knew that she wasn't going to survive and that she would need to sort of set it up for her son, Paulie, her stepdaughter, Caro, and there's a local woman as well, Sally. And those three characters actually narrate the book. And the narrative kind of moves back and forward in time, sort of detailing how the characters got to the High House, but also how the sort of in the background they're talking about the weather and how the summers got longer and longer and hotter, and the winters got unpredictable and the birds failed to migrate. So it's all kind of happening in these sort of tiny increments. It's so powerful and so moving. On the one hand, it's sort of the story of this unconventional family of three, and it's also about the sort of inexorable crisis and sort of the end and how it sort of the world is slowly shutting down. But her writing is just exquisite. I mean, she's just a stunning writer. So I really, really heartily recommend that. And it's always lovely to kind of support little publisher as well. Oh, and Max Porter really likes it, which is good, always a good sign.
Can I actually, there was a really good paragraph early on that follows on from what you're saying about this book. I don't know whether I'll just read a couple of the sentences here, because it is about that feeling about whether they're mourning one thing or starting something anew. So this was when it was still the beginning of things, when we were still uncertain and it was still possible to believe that nothing whatever was wrong, bar an unusual run of hot Julys and January storms. There's such eeriness in the kind of mundane and yet really lyrical as well, and attentive. I'm loving this.
Yeah, I loved it. It was wonderful. So my next book, so we're moving into April, and this again is a very plain proof. This was very, very early proof run. The finished jacket is really spectacular. I've seen that online. So Leone Ross was a new name to me. This is actually her third novel. She had two novels published in the late 90s. And then this was actually, I interviewed her, this was 15 years in the writing. And it's set on the fictional Caribbean archipelago, I always stumble over that word, called Poppy Show, where the islanders are born with, each islander is born with a sort of special magical ability called cause. It's set over a single day, and it opens at dawn. And Xavier Redchews is the Macaneus, which means he's the latest in a long line of master chefs. And his cause, his special ability, is that he can flavour food with the palms of his hands. And he runs a restaurant called the Torn Poem. But at the start of this novel, he's been instructed by the governor of Poppy Show, who's very corrupt, to prepare a wedding feast for his daughter, the governor's daughter. So he sort of sets off to gather the ingredients for this feast. Meanwhile, we meet Anise, whose cause is that she can know what ails someone just by touching them. And she wakes up on this same morning to find her husband is missing, and she's told by her neighbour that this husband is having an affair, and that this other woman is pregnant. So she sets off to find her husband, and the novel sort of follows their respective journeys. But this is just the most fabulous mix of magic and magical realism and satire and just joy. I mean, the world building is just phenomenal. And the reason I really love this is it was so exciting to read, because I genuinely had no idea not only where the sort of story was going overall, but also within the chapters or even within a page, because she's such a brilliantly kind of inventive writer. And the sort of imagined world of Poppy Show was so detailed and so unexpected. And yeah, it's wonderful. It was a real kind of fresh and vibrant voice, I think. I mean, and it's pretty substantial, but you sort of, you start reading about Poppy Show and then it just sort of closes over your head. You just get totally kind of swept away. So that is highly recommended.
And the cover, I think, is going to be a really bright, colourful, beautiful.
Yes,
as well,
yeah, it should be. It should be. I think that's the thing with very early proofs. They're very plain, and you don't really get much of a sort of sense of what they're going to be like. So next, so this is a very fancy proof actually. This is Erin Kelly's Watch Her Fall. And they've actually even helpfully on the back, they've put, I don't know if this is going to be the final jacket, but there's lots of blurbs on the front because Hodder are very excited about this, and so they should be. This is really thrilling psychological suspense. And when I actually interviewed Erin Kelly for the Bookseller, and she sort of said that her policy was to say as little as possible about this book in case she blew the twist, which is quite tricky when you're interviewing someone. But I can see why. It's got, I mean, not just one twist, but there's a kind of central twist, which is an absolute kind of humdinger, and you just sort of changes. I love those books where you read something and then it totally changes everything you've read and you thought you knew. But this is set, it's her 8th novel, I should add, and it's set in the world of professional ballet. Ava Kirilova is the principal dancer of the London Russian Ballet, and she's 30, and she's just preparing to play the coveted lead role in Swan Lake, so that's Odette Odile. And unsurprisingly, the other dancers are very jealous as they watch her from the wings. And then the novel sort of moves, I mean, she does the world of the ballet school and the ballet company so well. It's very intense, it's very claustrophobic, very competitive, sort of high stakes, cutthroat environment. But the novel soon moves beyond that out into London, which is in the grip of a heat wave. And it takes place over this long hot summer. And then we meet two new characters who are sort of desperate and ambitious in different ways. They're part of the gig economy. And it's how Erin Kelly meshes those two storylines together. Yeah, it's just, I'm not going to say any more about the plot, but it is just brilliant. And I think booksellers will know her. She had a real standout breakthrough with He Said, She Said, which was a Richard and Judy book club pick, and also a pick for Simon Mayo on Radio 2. And that was about sexual assault and the court process. And she's a writer who's sort of, as she said to me, she's very interested in where sort of privilege meets disadvantage. And she's sort of, she will marry a killer plot with sort of complex social issues as well. And I mean, I was kind of predisposed to love this because I was a real balletomane when I love going to the ballet and I love books about ballet. But you don't have to be to enjoy this. I mean, I think it's a bit Black Swan, the sort of packaging. And I think it will appeal to lots of different readers. You know, if you kind of love books about ballet, it's one for you. And if you love really kind of incredible, audacious twists, then it's definitely one for you as well.
Yeah, it seemed really well set up to just kind of give you the background of what you would need to know if you come in no kind of prior knowledge of Swan Lake or anything, and it's all kind of pitched well, but yet has that kind of page turning quality to it. Yeah,
definitely. So
is it May next? I think it's May.
Yes, I think I should add actually that publication dates are changing all the time, so people should booksellers should definitely kind of double check when things are coming, because I think I mean at one point the publication dates were just absolutely pinballing around the schedules, and I would write 1 month and file it, and then the publisher would submit for the next month and it would have titles that had just gone in the previous month. So we were constantly, I mean, last year it was just ridiculous. We just couldn't keep up. So we kind of say everything is correct at time of going to print, and then you have to kind of check. What else is happening? Sorry, my children have just come back. If you hear any noise, I'm trying to ignore them. Right. This is the next one I'm going to talk about. And yes, this is May, I believe. Quite a hefty book. So I think people might know Maggie Shipstead because of her debut, which was actually ages ago. I looked it up. It was back in 2012, called Seating Arrangements. And it was the most wonderful debut. It was clever and witty, sort of social satire. This is her, as I say, her third novel, and she's got a new publisher now. This is her first for Transworld. It's on the the Doubleday imprint. And this was 7 years in the writing, and I think, you can kind of tell a lot of work has gone into it. Epically long, it's 608 pages, but it's also epically brilliant. Because sometimes I have to say my heart sinks a little bit when I've got like loads of massive proofs, because I have to read so much. But this, honestly, you just get started and it just swallows you up, and those pages just absolutely zip by. So it was my book of the month. I've written book of the month June, so I'm now confused whether it's May or June. Anyway, so it tells the story of two women. Marian Graves, who is an orphan and grows up in relative poverty in 1920s Montana with her twin brother Jamie, and they're brought up by their uncle Wallace, as their mother drowned aboard an ocean liner. And then as a child, she has this extraordinary encounter where she's out in the sort of wilds of Montana, and overhead flies this red and black biplane, and it's flown by Felix and Trixie, who are the flying Brayfogels, and do sort of, tricks and things in the air. And they're flying west to find stunt work in Hollywood, but she meets them. And that ignites in her this just love and this determination that she is also going to fly. And so she does various jobs, just kind of trying to scrape the money together to be taught how to fly. And then she flies bootleg out of Canada during Prohibition, and the novel follows her. She comes over to England to fly planes in the Second World War. Women were allowed to move planes around from airfield to airfield. They couldn't actually kind of fly them in combat. But there's a great mystery about her life, Marian's life, which is that she disappeared whilst flying over Antarctica. In 1950, she was on this sort of crazy attempt to fly pole to pole, and she vanished, and she was never seen again. And then Marian's story is interwoven with that of Hadley Baxter, who is in the present day. And Hadley is a sort of one-time child star in Hollywood, who has just behaved very badly and just been sacked from the lead role in a major franchise. And then she gets the opportunity to play Marian in a film and just becomes obsessed with her, and particularly the mystery of what happened to Marian when she disappeared and was never seen again. Now this is storytelling really on an epic scale. It's grand, sweeping. The characters, I think, because you spend so much time with them from Marian almost from birth up until the end, you become, I was just bereft when I finished it. I really was. I was just, in that world with her. And it's also really striking because these are two, and particularly Marian, who's just determined to sort of live life on her own terms, and just do in a time when women didn't have the agency necessarily that Marian kind of takes for herself. So I really recommend it. I think she's a stunning writer, and I think this will be really, really big. Her second novel was called Astonish Me, and she's always been fantastically well reviewed. So I think this is really a book to be aware of. I loved it.
And it was interesting because it's another one of those books that both has a map in it too. And
yes.
It seems like it is, despite the kind of the storyline being cinematic, the book seems cinematic in the way it is. There's a lot to get into there.
Yeah, it would make a wonderful film, actually. I think it was very, very, very cinematic. Okay, so I've got two more, Will, and then you can tell me what I've missed and what you're looking forward to be selling in your shop. So next up, we've got Esther Freud. I Couldn't Love You More. Now, I really love Esther Freud. I remember quite distinctly reading her debut, Hideous Kinky, And this was, there's a lovely author letter inside, which kind of, inside my proof, which explains that this was actually inspired by her own family history. And it begins with Aoife, who is sitting at the bedside of her dying husband and is remembering their marriage, and she talks to him about when they met back in 1939 and sort of the life they built together. And then there are two other points of view in the novel. There's Rosaline, who we meet as a teenager, who on the sort of beginning of the swinging 60s, when she meets Felix Leichtman, who is a sculptor, and she falls in love with him, and it's all kind of marvelous and bohemian, and they have a wonderful time until she becomes pregnant and turns to a local priest for help, and then the advice that he gives her sort of affects everybody else. And then we move to London in the 1990s, where Kate is unhappily married with a daughter, but wants to uncover the truth about her past. So I'm not going to tell you how all those three women are linked, but they are all sort of linked together. And this is a beautiful story, beautifully written, about mothers and daughters and secrets and lives. And she's so good on place, I think, Esther Freud as well. Like, she evokes London in the 60s just brilliantly. And I love the fact that the title is a kind of dual meaning, because you first read it as I couldn't love you more, meaning, oh gosh, I love you so much and there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. But also, I couldn't love you more, I loved you as much as I could, and then I just couldn't love you anymore. So I really, when you finish the novel, you realize it could be said by kind of each of the characters to another character at some point. So it's a really clever title. It's a lovely jacket, I think, if you see on the back with the sort of the tree. So yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm a huge fan of Esther Freud. I always kind of, when I see that there's a new Esther Freud coming, I'm always really excited, because I think she, you know, every book is just so good. Like, I've never been disappointed. So yeah, I think that's definitely one to kind of look out for. And right.
Was this was the final one, was one that we were thinking was going to be hugely anticipated? Yeah,
definitely. You can't, this is actually the back of the proof, this is the front, but yeah, this is Animal, Lisa Taddeo. So this is her debut novel, but of course everybody, her first book, which was non-fiction, I'm sure is fresh in every bookseller's mind. It was Three Women, which was the sort of explored sexual desire and agency through the stories of three different women in the US. It was an international bestseller. It was huge. It won the British Book Awards, actually, non-fiction narrative book of the year. And I think this will be pretty big as well. It's narrated by Jean, and practically the first thing she tells you on the first page, the first paragraph, is that she had to leave New York City after her married lover shot himself in front of her at a restaurant where she was having dinner with another married man. And then she drives across the US to Los Angeles to rent a house. And the reason that she's done that is she's desperate to find a younger woman who teaches yoga, whose name is Alice. But as a reader, you don't know why, you don't know what the connection is, or why Joan is so desperate to find Alice. And as she looks for Alice and then finds her and sort of starts establishing a relationship with her, Joan tells us her life story, and it's tells us about her married lover, Vic, about all her relationships and the damage that men have done to her, but also that she has inflicted on them. And at the core of the novel, the kind of central mystery which just pulls you through is her childhood, and the single event in her childhood that has rippled out to sort of affect her whole life. It's absolutely compulsive. I read this And then I remember looking at the clock at midnight thinking, I've got to work tomorrow. I really should just be sensible and put it down. And I physically couldn't put it down. I had to keep on reading. I think I finished about 2 in the morning or something. It's a novel about love and desire and how sort of complex these emotions are. And Joan she's a victim, but she's also a perpetrator. And in some sense, this is a sort of revenge tragedy, but it's got the most hopeful ending as well. I mean, it was so satisfying to read. I think it's going to provoke a lot of debate. I think, I personally loved Joan, but I love a bit of an anti-heroine. And I think, I'm looking forward to seeing the reviews and when people have read it, because I think she's going to generate a lot of debate, and I think that will be really exciting. So, Will, tell me about what you're looking forward to. I've just talked.
Well, I loved the list that you sent through, and certainly, lots were on my radar, and lots weren't. Like the Maggie Shipstead, I've just started, and I'm really enjoying that. So I'm really looking forward to reading more of that. But the only other things that I think that were probably my way were, to start with, they were Canadian influenced books, because I tend to look out. We get a lot of kind of press and publicity here about American titles, so I'm always kind of tending to see what's coming from Canada. So the first of those was the Mary Lawson's A Town Called Solace.
Oh, I love that. I really did. Do you think she's very Ann Tyler, isn't she? Do you think?
Yeah. I'd read her past books too, so just her name I knew I'd like what she came out with next, and she kind of meshes in my mind with a kind of a novelistic Alice Munro as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
That just works so well. So out with vintage now. And then on the other kind of Canadian relevant book coming out is from Daunt Books. They are printing, I think probably for the first time in the UK, a book from the 1970s, Marian Engel's Bear, which has huge quotes from Margaret Atwood on it. It's bizarrely, it's one that it is taught on Canadian literature programs in the UK. So many of the strange students who've, like me, gone through that experience will have read it at university, wondering whether they were the only people to encounter a dark Gothic tale, essentially about a librarian who falls in love with a bear. So,
gosh, that sounds good.
It's visceral. So, and just along the kind of quirky stuff people like Daunt are publishing as well at the moment, something a bit interesting, a bit different to some of the mainstream presses as well. So, sure to be controversial, but equally is going to see fans. And then otherwise, my thoughts were the A.K. Blakemore.
This does look really good.
So I've got that one here, which is a historical novel all about East Anglia in the 17th century, and Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, cropping into a very strange village life.
Witches have been a really big theme, haven't they, in fiction?
Yeah, and they're getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of kind of witchy and also sort of tarot-based writing out there at the moment too. But this one, I read a review recently saying they thought it was the best historical novel since Wolf Hall, which is probably a big hit, but certainly is really interesting when it comes to a literary historical fiction. And then on a similar bent, I just threw out there Carol Birch, probably known to people for Jamrak's Menagerie.
Of course, yeah, that was Booker listed, wasn't it? Yeah.
She's got a new book coming out called Cold Boy's Wood, which is a kind of a mystery, a rural mystery, really well written, gripping, kind of eerie ghost story almost, and just really attentive, literary, and great. So those are the things I suppose that are on my list that we haven't discussed yet. But there are so many good things coming out. I'm so grateful to you for highlighting all of these amazing books, and hearing you enthuse over them has been
my pleasure.
So thank you so much, and I hope all the booksellers watching will have enjoyed this too.
Thanks a lot, Will.
Thanks so much to both of you. That's been amazing. I've been frantically writing notes. I've just started the Mary Lawson, Will, so I'm really enjoying that, that Canadian connection. Thanks so much to both of you for all the hard work reading and discussing. I'm sure that's been really inspirational for booksellers watching. Do join us tomorrow at the same time, same place, where we'll be looking at children's books with Stephen Price from Pickled Pepper Bookshop in London, and Charlotte Eyre and Fiona Noble from the bookseller side. So I'm sure that'll be equally fascinating and inspirational. It's just lovely to listen to you all in conversation, both in conversation. It's a really nice way to learn about the books. So thank you very much. And for the booksellers, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you.